the meeting, but if you can just wait until Simon's confirmed it is live streaming.
We have lost Margaret Corvid for a minute by the looks of it, but hopefully she'll come back in.
Hi, I'm here. I'm here.
Great.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, Simon.
Yeah, that's coming through fine.
Okay, perfect. Chair, if you want to start the meeting, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, members. Thank you for taking the opportunity to join us this afternoon for the Community Safety and Critical Planning Committee. A few housekeeping rules before we start. It is always useful if you could keep your phones on mute during the meeting. It stops interruptions. Obviously, as is always the case, if the fire alarm sounds at your house, make sure you exit, but let us know that you're safe if that was the case. Also, just to remind you, the meeting is being recorded today and we are streaming live on YouTube. So please remember that with all your responses. If you could please keep your microphones muted unless you're called to speak, that would be very helpful. And if you want to indicate to speak when we finish each item, what I'll ask you to do is either, if you're au fait with it, raise your hand, the virtual hand that is. Failing that, you can write in the chat box to say, I'd like to speak. And as a last resort, if you want to, please put your video on and start waving at us. Either Sam or myself will try and acknowledge you, or Steve, and we'll note the fact that you're requesting to. Just for clarity, what I plan to do today is we'll run through. There are members of the committee present, but of course there are also non-members of the committee. Generally, the way I like to work is that what we do is I'll invite members of the committee to ask questions and speak first, then open it up for other members to speak, which I'm more than welcome to do so during my meetings. Again, video option is up to you. You can leave it on if you feel happy to do so, or turn it off and then turn it on when you speak. I think that's all the housekeeping. Sam, am I sorted with that? Just so I can see you.
Absolutely spot on. Thank you.
Thank you. So, without further ado, we move on. Item 1 of our agenda is apologies for absence, please.
Chair, I have received an apology from Ray Radford, but we've been notified that Andrew Saywell will be subbing for him today. Neither Ian Doggett nor Jeff Trail are present today, so I would submit their apologies as well.
Thank you very much. Okay, item 2 of our agenda is minutes of the last meeting. They have been circulated. Any points or comments in relation to those minutes? I'm happy to take silence as contentment if you are, Sam.
Thank you, Chair. That's great.
Okay, thank you very much. So, item 3 of our agenda, urgent items requiring urgent attention. I'm not aware of any. Sam, anything?
No, I'm not aware of any either, Chair. Thank you.
Even better then. So bear with me while I flip my pages. I still do paper when I'm chairing the meeting. It's easier to find your way around. I apologise to the odd tree, but it's easier to manage a virtual meeting when you have access like this. So we are on item 4 of our agenda. So it is the Safer Together programme update. I believe that Gavin, are you presenting this to us? And members, just for clarity, the recommendation is just for note. So we'll take comments and questions once Gavin is finished. If you'd like to make note of your questions, so save them to the end rather than interrupting, it makes it a little bit easier for us. Gavin, thank you for joining us. Over to you, sir.
Many thanks, Councillor. Well, thank you all for today. So the paper that I'll be presenting is the Safer Together programme, which consists of 4 strands. Those are the service delivery operating model that we've been working through, fleet and equipment replacement programme, the data and digital programme, and then finally the people development. And I'll just run through some of the areas, the sort of highlights for each of those at the moment. So with the service delivery operating model, one of the key achievements that we've had is around the pay for availability. I will say that actually I inherited this work, and it's down to the work and hard work of Pete Bond to have got us where we've got to in his previous role. So thank you, Pete, for doing what you've done. We did see the first 6 stations adopting the early adopters starting on the 1st of October. So pay for availability has now officially started within the organisation. We'll be monitoring those stations over the next few months and few weeks to look at any teething problems around the information provided around pay and fair shares of hours and how we can support them. So there's 89 of our firefighters now have moved on to that system, which is a real testament to the work that's gone on. We are looking to move the second larger group onto the system from the 1st of January next year. So hopeful that the trial that we're currently going through at the moment with the early adopters will see any teething problems sorted out before then to allow us to move more people on. We do have, although we're moving a larger group on, we do have a lot of stations that are ready to move on to the system. And actually it's the more around the systems that we have in place, which is making us take our time to make sure we get it done properly. So we wouldn't want everyone to rush across onto it quicker than what we need to and find that there may be issues with the systems that can't quite cope with the demand. So we're managing it in that way, and I believe it's the correct way of managing it to make sure we can get to the resolution that we need. Moving on to risk-dependent availability. So we're currently progressing the model. We have had selective alerting trials taking place over recent weeks to look at how we're going to manage that. And with the selective alerting, we're looking at two ways of achieving the risk-dependent availability, which I'm sure you would have known previously as the nighttime cover, so the daytime cover being switched off. So we're looking at whether we provide different tones for the alerters so people know whether they're being called out, whether they're part of the standard crew, whether they're part of the voluntary crew, or we're looking at whether we switch between an A and a B system so people switch between their 2 alerters so they're not disturbed unnecessarily. So those trials are taking place at the moment, and the teams are working hard on that. Roving appliances, it will consist of three phases moving forward. We have had some good progress with this, and we're looking at commencing on January the 1st next year with moving those out. So that's dependent upon recruiting our new firefighters into the service. We're currently going through a recruitment process which is exclusive at the moment for on-call staff into whole-time positions. So we're currently, as we speak, undertaking interviews of those individuals to offer positions. Once we get to full establishment with the organisation, we can start to look at the spare capacity we've got on our whole-time watches. Those individuals will be placed onto roving appliances to undertake prevention, protection and response work in areas where we need additional cover. So that's progressing well, excuse me, and we're looking for that to start in January as well, start of January. The removal and the replacement of the P2s and L4Ps rollout is going well. We've now got a number of 4x4s, or the L4Ps, on the run, and they've been established at those stations. We're currently looking at the replacement of the P3s with the L4Ps to be completed again by January 2021. So there'll be some themes throughout the update, particularly around fleet replacement and then linking in with the removal and replacement of the P2s and 3s. Because of obviously the impact of COVID has seen many of the suppliers closing down for periods, for the months on end, excuse me, which has had an impact on delivery times. But we are keeping in contact with the suppliers, and it's back on track. You'll be aware in the paper it doesn't actually give the details around the sale of Budleigh because of the time that the paper was published and sent and circulated was before the time that we could actually release the details of the sale of Budleigh. So that's now been complete and the handover has taken place, which you'll be pleased to know. And that brings me on to the Topsham relocation. So the building works have commenced at Station 45, Cliff St George. And that's to ensure that we've got appropriate BA storage and drying facilities for the crews when they start there. We have done quite a bit around the recruitment of staff, and our first training course has been undertaken and has finished. and we now have staff available to be able to be deployed at Middlemore and at Cliff St George. So again, we're looking with the building works, we're looking at a full establishment to be moved across to those two locations in 2 months' time in December of this year. So that's the areas around the SDOM, or the Service Delivery Operating Model, and I'll move on to the fleet replacement. So the MRPs, fire appliances. So as I mentioned before, there has been a delay due to the COVID lockdowns in other parts of the country with E1, but it's back on track now, and we're looking at receiving our first batch in spring, early next year. So the timing of that, we've been able to identify with the movement of vehicles around, with the replacement of the L4Ps and the 4x4s and the MRPs, has had an impact internally on our driver training provision. So the time frames of when we're looking to receive the appliance now, we've been able to match that in line with our driver training facilities so that we can ensure that they're delivered and allocated to the stations appropriately. You'll see as well that we've got the all-terrain vehicles for wildfire, for the Meet the Wildfire strategy. Currently have 5, so all 5 of those vehicles are currently in workshops, and they're being fire kitted out. I don't know if anybody was able to see them when they were shown off at headquarters, but they come in a standard green colour without any of our additional equipment on there. So they're currently being fitted out in workshops at the moment in preparation to be rolled out. They're going to be rolled out between November of this year and January early next year. Looking at our asset management, so there's been a slight delay, and that's because of some of the user acceptance testing that we've done, which has been quite rigorous. It's identified a couple of teething problems, but the manufacturer is working through that at the moment with us. So that's still on track, but it means that to demonstrate the value of the user acceptance testing, to make sure that we actually get what it is that we need to be able to facilitate that. Moving on to data and digital. So the MORI app, which is the operational risk information, management of operational risk information, is progressing. That's going to consist of 4 applications around prevention, protection, response, and risk information. So the first app that's being developed at the moment is the protection app. That's going to fall in line with, at the same time as the roving appliances, and that will be able to identify to our crews where the risks sit within our built environment for staff to go and undertake protection visits and activities. So there'll be a much more intelligently led piece of software and application that will mean our staff can really be directed to where they need to go to. So particularly pertinent in response to some of the Grenfell recommendations and what's happening around the rest of the country within the built environment. Moving on, and finally to the people development strand. So the organisational development team have been working really hard to look at how we can start to develop our internal talent, but how we bring other people through the organisation as well. So they have created a Watch Manager development logbook, which will see staff go on to a properly developed development programme, identifying their areas for development and improvement that is specific to them, as well as a generic profile. Once that's been rolled out, or once we've again been able to trial that and see where the successes are and where there's possibly any areas to be developed further, the team will be working on logbooks for the rest of the rank structure within the organisation, so that everybody at some point as they move through the organisation, or if they move laterally, they will undertake some sort of development that will be monitored and tracked to make sure that they maintain not just their basic competence, but also their sector competence for the areas that they move into. We're also looking at starting our process for talent pools, and you may be aware that we're just about to undertake the interviews for our upcoming area manager process. So by mid next week, we'll be looking to appoint our 3 new area managers to join the strategic team. But from that, we were really keen to ensure that it's not just a it's not just a cut-off for anybody that doesn't make the grade to be appointed. We want to be able to identify internal talent and put them into a talent pool and develop them further in preparation for any further development opportunities that come up. So it's going to be more about how we develop staff moving forward rather than just how you perform on the day, which I think is a really huge step forward for the organisation. That also links in with the work that the team are doing around apprenticeships at the moment. So we're looking at drawing down the levy, not just for our firefighters, but also how we can tap into development opportunities for staff at all levels within the organisation. So that could be for our leadership training, whether it's a facilitated ILM course or whether it's somebody undertaking an external master's degree. We can tap into the apprenticeship levy and draw down on that to support our staff going through it at all levels. So again, I think that's a really, really positive step forward. There is one caveat with all of the work that we're presenting, and that is.
Yes, I am. Can you not see me?
Sorry.
Okay, I'll do that. Sorry, I'm not sure if they can.
Yeah, we can hear you. So if there you go.
Great.
Carry on.
Thank you. So yes, there are a couple of caveats with this, which are out of our control at this time, and they are obviously what's happening with the COVID response. So we've got our recovery team working really hard, and we are starting to switch some of our business as usual activities back on around prevention and protection, and training courses taking place on fire stations, things like that. But actually, some of the key areas, and you'll notice that a lot of the dates that we're looking at introducing things are going to be between November of this year and January of next year, where we're looking at filtering a lot in. So there's a really good window of opportunity to be able to bring this all in together, demonstrate to the communities, demonstrate to the workforce about the commitment that the Fire Authority have made to the organisation and the cost that we've put aside for this. But the two biggest risks are going to be a national lockdown or a regional lockdown in certain areas, and the impact of track and trace. Now, the impact of track and trace may be on some of our internal functions, where we may have not single points of failure, but reduced points of failure. So, for example, if that was to impact on the driver training school, that may have an impact on how we train our staff when we do the rollout of the vehicles. If there is the local and national lockdown, that could impact again on businesses closing, and particularly when we look at the MRP build, that could have an impact on the time delays of being able to receive the vehicles back into service to progress those. So the work is progressing really well, and the staff and the teams and the project teams are working really, really hard to move this along. And they've done some fantastic work. And with a backdrop of COVID, they've been doing really well. So I'm really, really pleased to present this paper, and I'll welcome any questions.
Gavin, thank you for that. While I give members a moment to start waving their hands and doing stuff like that, I suppose before we start, it's important you made reference to COVID and the impact on the service. And I've said it before, but I will continue to say it, that our thanks goes as members goes out to all our members of staff, because across the board they've gone above and beyond the call of duty, and I will never regret repeating myself a number of times when it comes to this. We're still mid pandemic. The Southwest has been reasonably lucky when it comes to the rates, but who knows what's over the horizon, and the fact that we're there and working very hard is important to it. So again, just from the chair, and I know that members will probably reiterate it as we go through the meeting today, but thank you all for your time and effort in this. While I'm waiting for there's no questions, members, don't forget to wave or put your hand up if you want to ask questions. I'll start off. It's a small point, and I noticed it a couple of times. I know most of our members are pretty switched on when it comes to but I'm also recognise the fact that we're being streamed. So acronyms. I know what Papa 2, Papa 3, etc. is. Unless you've got the papers in front of you, it might be worth maybe if we can perhaps put a glossary together that we can have, so that you don't have to keep reading it. I check the papers, and you rightly, when you go through the papers, make reference to when you mentioned the first time you called the appliance by the appliance name, but sometimes we all get caught up in acronyms, and it might be worth it if at the beginning of the meeting as chair, I could signpost members of the public or even new members to the committee somewhere that they can find that. That would be useful. Sam.
Chair, I'm sure I can pick that up for future meetings without a problem.
That's brilliant, because I was going through thinking to myself, I was looking at the papers thinking, I know what Gavin's talking about, but when you start going off, and it tended to get a bit confusing, so I just made a note of that. I know it's an interesting. I know it's an interesting point that you were talking about. There's lots of work going on through this, and when we're doing the pay for availability program, I would be interested. Obviously, that there's one thing sort of made me jump a little bit, because obviously it's great that we're rolling it out, and it's great and I know that as a committee we need to be careful where we go between the operational and the strategic views that we are. But speaking as an ex-on-call firefighter myself, if it would be possible, if you could perhaps share the current draft policy for the pay for availability, just so that I can have a look at it, or any other members that may be interested. I think we said it before, this is a fantastic opportunity for the service. And the fact that we're leading the way nationally for something like this is good. And some of us dip our toes into things a bit wider than just Devon and Somerset. So the fact that if we were aware of these things, it would be helpful. I'm conscious, I think, Andrew Saywell, do you wish to ask a question, sir?
Yes, I do, Chairman. If I may. No, thanks for that. Thanks for this very comprehensive report. It was to pick up on Lee's point about payment for availability. Unless I've missed it, I was just wondering which stations has that already been rolled out to? Is it in a particular area or sector of Devon and Somerset, or is it all across the authority area? And then secondly, how long do we have to wait until we do get some reliable data to show whether this new scheme is improving and increasing the availability of on-call firefighters? Because that is the key. I know throughout the Safer Together consultation, there was huge controversy about availability and so forth. And when we had represented some certain station areas that were scheduled for closure and saying, don't get rid of our local fire station. And I looked at the availability of those stations and they were very, very low. So, I mean, how long do we have until we can get some really good, reliable data on this? Because it's crucial. We've got to increase the availability on our on-call fire stations. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll the two questions, and I'm glad that Pete's camera's come on, because I was going to suggest that Pete take those two questions, if that's okay. Because Pete, as I said at the start, I inherited this work from Pete. Pete's done a fantastic job to get us where we are.
Thanks, Gav. Chair, through you, Councillor Saywell raises a couple of good points. So in answer to the first question, where are the stations located as early adopters? There is one in each group across the service, so 6 as part of the early adopters. So Holsworthy, Exmouth, Tiverton, Dartmouth, Ilminster, and Dawlish being the other one. So the reason those stations have been chosen, A, because they obviously put their names forward and volunteered and were very willing to participate in this new innovative duty system, but also they gave us a range of different scenarios to test the system against, and also to iron out any of the glitches which we felt would probably come up through. So, for example, we've got a co-responder station, we've got a pump 2 fire engine station, we've got stations that are also part of the risk-dependent availability modelling, which Gavin talked about earlier. So it gives us a good experience as to how pay for availability can be implemented across the service. In terms of results and understanding the impact, so members will recall that one of the outcomes of the meeting back in January was that the Audit and Performance Review Committee wanted to review the measures in order to understand the impact of all of the approved decisions back in January. So that will form part of a piece of work moving forward. What we hope to do is, within a couple of months, understand the impact of paper availability on these 6 stations, so we can see exactly what's happening to both the availability of personnel and the fire engines in particular, but also the potential impact on the emergency response standards as well. And what we are anticipating is that it could be somewhat of a balancing act between the two. We do know from experience that higher levels of availability, particularly for what we call a PAPA 1 appliance, so that's the first appliance on a station that gets mobilised, we know that that will have a direct impact on improved emergency response standard. However, the way that paper availability works is it means it basically rosters firefighters to be a part of a crew. So those firefighters may be turning in, maybe responding to the station from slightly further away, which may have a negative impact on the emergency response standard in comparison to their previous performance. What we don't anticipate is that it will have a negative impact on the overall emergency response standard for both fires and road traffic collisions, because we employ our people to live and work within 5 minutes of the station anyway, so they should all be available within that timescale. Hopefully, Councillor Saywell, that answers both those points for you.
Yes, it does for the moment. I think it would, just thinking going forward in the future, when we do have updates on it, if we can, I don't want to stray into the operational, but it would be useful to know which stations where it is being rolled out in, so that we know what's going on in the wider authority area. But I'd just like to place on record my own thanks to you, Pete. Echo what Gavin has said. You did a huge amount of work, tremendous amount of work on this. And certainly from my point of view, I thoroughly appreciated all the help and support that you gave me as an authority member during the last 12, 18 months this has been going on, and I want to thank you for it. So thank you.
I think picking up on that, as far as information is concerned, I made a note for further on as well, because we were speaking about the new appliances that are going into different locations, and I know the authority members would like an opportunity to support the introduction of these appliances. So it would be a point of, I've made a comment for a note for myself. So it would be useful if fire authority members were made aware of stations that were doing something different on, like the pay for availability, only because it's easier if it's in my area or their area or someone else. I know as a councillor, it's easier to be able to defend yourself when you're aware of what's going on, rather than get hit from behind. When it's been like this for the past 2 weeks, and you've done, and it's too late then once that starts going. So it would be helpful if we were made aware of stations that are doing something different, like pay for availability, and also as far as the new appliances go. It's always nice, it's not just us councillors that like to have our picture taken, but sometimes it's useful to be seen in the community making. I've got you, Andrew. Thank you. I'll bring you in a second. It's interesting for members of our community to see what's happening at the fire stations as well. And there are some firefighters that do like to have their picture taken, I know. So any opportunity would be helpful to help and support the service. Gavin, did you want to come back?
Yes, certainly, Councillor. I'd just like to say I'll keep you updated. I'll keep the authority updated with the changes that are looking likely to be made on each station as and when, whether it's any of the strands across the Safe Together programme.
Thank you. Okay, so at the moment I've got Margaret as indicated to speak and Andrew Eastman. So Margaret, I'll bring you in next, please.
Hi, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the very comprehensive report that I found extremely useful. You were talking about user acceptance testing for the new appliances and technology, and some teething problems with this particular set. But I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the user acceptance testing and what barriers you folks are overcoming as this new equipment is taken on.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you for your question. So this is specific to the asset management. So this is looking about how we track our assets. And it's an area that has plagued us for some time, actually, in UK FRS, about how we track our resources. So what we are looking at is we've got a team that are currently working on new policies and procedures about how we bring equipment into the organisation, how we manage the recording of it, and how we manage the testing of it throughout its lifetime. So some of the assets, data, and the facilities that we've used to bring that in, that's where they found the teething problems around the user acceptor requirements. So it's around the actual facilities, around the software where they found the issues, rather than the actual equipment that we provide the firefighters with.
Is that okay, Margaret?
Yeah, thanks. There was just a noise that I was waiting to clear. Yeah, thank you. That is very helpful.
The other way as well, it's with the new appliances that come into service, the easiest way to find out whether they're good enough is to give it to a firefighter to play with. They do enjoy finding ways to break things. Andrew Eastman, sir. You need to find the unmute button, Andrew. Sometimes if you press and hold the space bar, it might save you having to find the button. Give that a try. There you go. Speak away.
It was a delight. Can you hear me, Chairman?
Yes, Andrew. Hold the space bar and keep going.
It was an absolute delight to hear Officer Gavin Ellis talk about the apprenticeships and the offers of apprentices. And of course, all of the 4x4 Ford Rangers that are being brought into service in the future. Please, I know very well that you are fully aware that Barnstable and Bideford, but please remember that the Appledore shipbuilders industry will be up and running leading up to Christmas and into the new year. And as long as you don't forget, Gavin, that Appledore is always delighted to receive you when you come down and visit us. There'll be plenty of news to tell you about the shipyard, and especially with craft like Ford Rangers and the new L4Ps, we'll always be delighted to assist and help with that in all of our stations. Thank you, Chairman.
Now it's my turn to fail to find the mute button. Andrew, thank you. And I'm sure that, Gavin, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, certainly. No, thank you for your observations and comments, Councillor. And we do have a round of visits planned for all of our stations, but I'll make a point of going to Appledore to speak with them personally.
It's great, Gavin. On that point, it's great to hear that you station visits planned. Could you obviously, a lot of the members have expressed an interest previously about supporting you. I know mine. I have myself. Something like getting onto a fire station and to hear and feel what's going on. So if you could be supported in those, or Sam's waving at me, so I've jumped the gun by the look of it. Go, Sam.
No, Chair, thank you for that. Just to help Gavin out, that point is still being worked on. We are trying to coordinate it and form a plan on that, and we will be in contact with members shortly.
I do love a good plan. Thank you very much for that. I got George has indicated to speak. Vice Chair, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I even remember to unmute myself. Councillor Saywell mentioned the objective of pay for availability as improving the availability of our appliances. Another thing that was that we discussed going back to January the 10th, long time ago now, but was aggregate crewing. Is there anything to tell us about whether that's making any progress, please?
Yeah, certainly. So thank you for the question. The aggregate crewing is still progressing, and it's a lot of these things fall in place together at the same time. As I've mentioned before about the November to January, again, aggregate crewing we'll be looking at with Roving Appliances, looking at the risk dependent availability to make sure we can see where our risk remains and where we need to be putting crews, and also the roving appliances. We are still progressing the aggregate crewing. I don't know, Pete, you've come on the screen now. I don't know if there's any further update you can give specifically to that.
Yeah, thanks, Gav. Through you, Chair. The situation is as it was, as Gav's explained there, with regards to the dependencies of other elements of the service delivery operating model coming together to enable aggregate crewing. One of the issues we found is that from the Fire Brigade Union's perspective, they found it difficult to accept any form of reduced crewing as part of any collective agreement, which is what's held up the negotiations in that respect. In terms of moving it forward, we are speaking with the Fire Brigade Union on a regular basis to try and amend some of the wording to allow that to come to fruition. And crewing actually is a policy decision rather than a negotiating point between us and any representative body. So what Gavin's outlined around the roving appliances and the use of whole-time staff that are not required to ride their fire engines on a particular shift as part of making up crews as an overall attribute-based response, which aggregate crewing would form part of, becomes that point in play. Part of the issue also relates to the fact that our mobilising systems are not yet geared up to identify individual firefighters. So when we mobilise a fire engine, it mobilises it as a complete crew, as a minimum of 4. And in order to mobilise crews of less than 4, and therefore bring firefighters together, we need to update, we need an upgrade to the system, which is currently being negotiated with the supplier. In the interim, our control room are able to do a manual workaround to enable it to happen. But it's a work in progress alongside some of the other dependencies.
George, did that meet your expectations?
That's fine. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks, Pete and Gavin. Thanks, Chair.
I'm getting near the end of my. Well, I am at the end of my list, but I've made another note just for clarification. 2.5 of the report, the risk-dependent availability. Once again, as an ex-on-call firefighter, I get a little jumpy when I see selective alerting. It's a strange term. I'm assuming you're not talking about individuals being alerted. It's more, excuse me, it's more a bank that's on or off rather than anything else.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Chair. So what we're looking at is two potential options for this. As you know, if we take Fire Station X and it's got 20 firefighters on it, each of those will have a pager, and it may be that through the pay for availability, only 5 of those are available at any one point. So what they're looking at the moment with selective alerting is whether everyone's alerter goes off, but it has a different type of tone for the first 5 that need to come in. And then the other tone is for those that are on the volunteer system that come in to do the crewing of the other appliances if those daytime pumps have been, or fire appliances have been switched off. So it's whether we have different tones for different groups of people, but they'd all be alerted, or whether we have a switch system where they move from being on or off so that they don't get disturbed during those times. So that's the process we're going through at the minute around the testing to see which one is more favourable to the crews.
I won't get tied up in the nitty-gritty now, but can I ask if we could perhaps you and I have a conversation about this outside of the meeting? Otherwise, it'll get confusing for you. Are there any other members of the committee that would like to ask any questions? If not, then we're asked to note this. So again, once again, thank you very much for that one, Gavin, and you can breathe a sigh of relief now and stand down for a second. Thank you very much. Okay, members, we're moving on to item 5 of our agenda then, which is the Grenfell Recommendations Progress Report. If you remember correctly, it's something that I asked that we look at regularly because there are a number of points that we can and will benefit from as a service, and if we're ahead of the game, at least as members, we're kept aware of it. And I know behind the scenes officers have been working very hard. So again, the report is to be noted. But of course, we can ask questions, etc., as we would normally. Pete Bond is presenting this. So, Pete, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. So, obviously, a bit of a change in circumstances between Gavin and myself, so we're picking up each other's work as we're moving through. So it's quite good that we're both on the call for both parts of the meeting today. In terms of providing members of the committee in progress against the Grenfell Tower recommendations, I think it's worth noting that this is a slightly bigger than that initial idea, because we've had more information come from both the Home Office and the inquiry as to what our expectations are around implementations for complex and high-risk buildings and the fire safety within those. And members will be aware of a lot of media interest, particularly in high-rise buildings that are still suffering from reduced fire safety standards. From a local perspective, the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 1 had 44 recommendations that were issued through the NFCC, the National Fire Chiefs Council, for implementation. A number of those are legislative changes, and if I take you to the table at paragraph 2.6 on the paper, you will see that 17 of the 44 require legislation to be passed by Parliament in order for us to understand what the implementation of those recommendations will be. So there's consultations due to be completed during November, and bills expected to become law early next year for us to then review and implement any outcomes from that. So that is something that is under constant review by us to make sure that we understand what the outcomes are, and we have an embedded member of staff with the National Fire Chiefs Council working group, so that we are well aware of any emerging issues. In terms of the sector-wide recommendations, there are 27 of those which have impacts on ourselves as a fire and rescue service in terms of training and competence levels for staff. But there are also a number which relate to how we will increase our expectations of the responsible person for fire safety in those high-risk buildings, and the expectations put upon them to undertake things like personal evacuation plans, regular risk assessments, and regular reviews of their fire safety measures. So the initial review against this that was reported to the committee back in July indicated that we had a number of these completed. However, we've had the opportunity to review many of those actions and recommendations and seeing that we could actually implement further improvements, both within the workforce, but more so in terms of how we educate and inform the responsible person for the building. So that's why we've reviewed the number of actions that we've got. So 4 complete and 23 in hand. Of the 23 in hand, the majority are about how we interact with people. Much of the training recommendations we have already completed. So we have in place a risk and review governance board to monitor this, and we have an action tracker which is being constantly monitored, and it's a multifaceted approach across several departments to ensure that we can implement those recommendations, but also report back to the National Fire Chiefs Council and the Home Office when required. Second part of the report takes you into some of the additional grant funding that has been released by the Home Office in reaction to the Grenfell Tower, but also some of the outcomes of the Dame Judith Hackett review. So in the previous report, members were informed that there was a grant of just over £316,900 that was there to deliver a building risk review, and that is specifically targeted at high-rise residential buildings, and also what's been termed a protection uplift. And this is to provide more capability within fire and rescue services for trained protection business safety staff to enforce the fire safety legislation and to educate and inform businesses where necessary. Since that report, Lord Greenhow from the Home Office
and has released further monies totaling for us £138,216, which has been termed the Grenfell Infrastructure Fund. Now, this is more to do with specific elements around increases in technology, better use of kit and equipment, and also to support further training funding where necessary. So the total grant funding to support the service in implementing the recommendations of Grenfell Tower and better implementation of protection work is just over 455,000, of which we have to give regular returns back to the Home Office. So just to specify a few other elements of this, as I mentioned, the building risk review is specifically there to deal with high-rise residential buildings. And we've been issued a list of 89 buildings from MHCLG in order to inspect over the next 12 months, or actually next 14 months, between October this year and December 2021. The team have put together a programme of visits to have all of our 89 buildings completed by September next year, so within a 12-month period, leaving us a 3-month window to mop up any which require a further visit, or the potential that some of those visits might become complex and therefore require extra work for us to deliver. We've also identified that there may be some buildings missing from the MHCLG list, so we will be obviously upgrading their list and feeding back to them to make sure that the residents and the citizens across Devon and Somerset are well protected. In terms of the locations of those buildings, they are spread right across the service area. As you'd expect, predominantly in our more urban areas of Plymouth, Torbay, Exeter and Taunton, although there are some high-rise buildings in a few towns located particularly around the coastal areas. So that piece of work is in train and in hand as we speak. The protection uplift funding, as I said before, is there to increase our fire protection capability, and it's to help us deliver our integrated risk management plan. So it ties in nicely with some of the recommendations which came out in the January 10th meeting earlier this year. In particular, we're seeking to increase the number and qualifications of our fire safety officers to make sure that we can deliver better quality education, but also high quality interventions when we need to. So just by way of information, at the present time we have 2 qualified fire engineers in the organisation, with a 3rd person entering their final year of that graduate programme. We have 21 level 4 diploma qualified fire safety individuals, with 11 further taking in training to complete that diploma. Then we've got a further 60 level 3 qualified individuals. So these are people that will be able to undertake inspections and audits. And then beyond that, we have 480 of our frontline firefighters that have basic fire safety foundation training, which enables them to give the initial inspection of a building, which we've been doing for a number of years, and other services are starting to develop. And that allows us then to start signposting both the occupiers and the responsible person for those buildings into how to undertake fire safety risk assessments, but also signposts our more experienced and qualified fire safety enforcement officers to high risk buildings as well. The plan, as Gavin mentioned earlier, around apprenticeships is to start building apprenticeship work into this training as well. And as we've talked about previously, one of the outcomes for the service delivery operating model is to invest more time and effort into both prevention and protection work for our staff. So we'll be seeking to increase the number of people qualified to level 3 from those frontline staff to enable us a better quality of intervention as well. And that's where we'll be using some of this uplift money to do that. Final piece, just to qualify, that Grenfell Infrastructure Fund that Lord Greenhow introduced in the summer, specifically for some local improvements and things such as smoke hoods. So members may be aware that
one of the outcomes of the Grenfell Tower and other high-rise buildings was the ability to provide smoke hoods for residents so that they could evacuate the building in a smoke-filled environment where the fire safety compartmentation had been compromised. So one of the outcomes of that funding is to purchase smoke hoods. We have that in hand. We're going through a procurement process at the moment, and we'll have smoke hoods in place on our appliances in the near future. Other elements we're looking at are things like hardware, so providing our officers with mobile tablets so that they can access information, they can input information direct into risk plans, they can upload things like risk assessments from the responsible person. One of the things we've invested in recently is a virtual tour facility, which means that we can effectively use a similar tooling to Google Maps, where we can actually fly into a building and examine it from a remote perspective, actually walk the routes of the building, make sure that the signage is in place. So it's a virtual tour of an actual building, which is helpful in particularly at this time when obviously we can't undertake face-to-face visits in an easy way for some buildings, and some premises have obviously been shut due to the lockdown measures that we've had in place over the summer. That work is being scoped further to understand exactly what will support and help our staff moving forward. And there'll be further reports which come back to the committee detailing some of those improvements which we'll seek to put in place and how we're going to spend that grant money. So that completes that, Chair. Happy to take any questions as usual.
Excellent. Thank you. Well done for that. I've not had any indications yet, but what I'll do, yes, I have. But I'll just jump in with one first. It's in relation to the fire safety stuff, and it's great to hear that we've got a number of qualified people in place already. But I'm assuming they're doing other things. So the question is, how are we looking? How will this? I suppose the easy way to do it would be is this additional roles or something that these officers will be doing at the same time? So are we looking to recruit? Is it mean the service is going to get bigger? One of the things you and I have spoken about before is the fact that some of the best people to do fire safety work are firefighters, and it's good that we're looking to go in that direction. So is it more roles or just another job to tag on?
So I think it's a combination of both, to be fair, Chair. We recognise that we're probably understaffed in some areas for the delivery of this protection work. And that's not an uncommon situation across the fire and rescue sector, which is one of the reasons that the Protection Uplift funding has been supported by the Home Office. Just by way of history, there was a move away from a more prescriptive fire safety arrangements in the early 2000s. Members may recall the provision of fire certificates in hotels and factories and offices back in the 70s and 80s. Those were removed. Protection Act, Fire Prevention Act was repealed, and a more health and safety executive approach was brought into play, where the person responsible for the building had to undertake a risk assessment. That meant that the number of officers we needed in order to enforce fire safety was reduced because the onus was put on the person responsible for the building. I think what's been recognised right across the sector is that the pendulum probably swung too far the other way, and we need to redress some of that balance to ensure that we can support those people in making sure that the fire safety arrangements are A, in place, but B, not compromised, which is one of the unfortunate outcomes that was recognised in the Grenfell Tower fire. So a little bit of recruitment, Chair, in order to increase our specific subject matter expertise, but I would see that mainly coming from within the service. So you're right to identify that we've got a lot of interested firefighters that would like to expand their knowledge and develop their careers, and we want to support that. But equally, we recognise that frontline firefighters do have the capacity and the capability to take on more work in this area. And in fact, the Inspectorate identified the fact that we probably do have some capacity, particularly in our whole-time crews, to be able to do that. And that's also forming part of the basis of our roving appliance work as well, to ensure that we can deliver that in more rural areas. So combination of both.
Thank you for that. Okay, so at the moment I'm seeing Margaret and Polly down to speak. So Margaret Corby, would you like to ask your question?
Thanks, Chair. With reference to item 3.5, and you mentioned this in your very good presentation, the 89 identified buildings to be visited by the team within the next 14 months. This is probably one of the most important things that will be done as part of the scheme of work to make sure these buildings are safe. And given that there's so many of them, is the coronavirus response and the potential of further lockdown measures as the winter comes on being taken into account as this work is being scheduled? And is this going to be resilient to lockdown? Are we still going to be able to visit these buildings if we get fully locked down again? Also, I think it would be great to have like a report on these buildings further down the line to this committee once you've gotten some of the work done. And thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so to reassure you, two elements really. Yes, we will be able to undertake these inspections even if we move into a further lockdown position, mainly because they are residential buildings. So therefore access to them is slightly different to more of the social elements. The one area I do have some concerns around is that some of these buildings are student accommodation, both Exeter and Plymouth University student accommodation. So therefore that's something we are very aware of under the current circumstances, and members will be aware that we have had a spike in Exeter, but also the general issues around undergraduate accommodation. So the team are aware of that, and we'll be scheduling those visits according to the risk assessments in place at the time. In terms of reporting, yes, we are looking to visit around 8 or 9 buildings every month. So at future committee meetings, we'll be able to report back on progress against those. And give some reassurance to members that we're progressing well. And I guess the final point I should make is that when the Grenfell Tower initial recommendations came out, every single one of the high-rise buildings in our staff as an initial response. So anything that was in a dangerous situation or things which needed immediate rectification was dealt with at that point. So this is very much dealing with some government recommendations more around permanent, ongoing risk assessment and reviews, and making sure that the people that are responsible for those buildings maintain the buildings to the right standard rather than rectifying any outstanding deficiencies.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Super, thank you. Polly, Councillor Colthrop, please.
Thank you, Chair. Pete, you mentioned in connection with competency, accreditation and qualifications some numbers. 2 who had or were soon to complete graduate training, 24 somethings and 480 something else's. And I lost track of what they all were along the way. Any chance we could have those again, please?
Pete, to save you repeating it again, I was going to suggest it might be worth, because it would be interesting, I think, for members to understand what the qualifications are as well. So it might be worth to maybe doing it as just a briefing note, if that's okay, Polly.
Absolutely, it is. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you in anticipation, Pete.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine, Chair. I can set that out in a bit more detail.
Super.
Chair, I can liaise with Pete and get that sent out to members in due course.
Thank you, Sam. That's fantastic and excellent action from this one. So, before I bring in Councillor Wheeler, George, to ask a question, I've got another one just in relation to, you mentioned about smoke hoods and buildings, and I think I get it, but I just wanted to clarify it just to make sure that I'm hitting the right. You talk about smoke hoods that we carry on fire appliances to help evacuate people, not providing smoke hoods to people in buildings to help them evacuate.
Yeah, that's correct, Chair. So basically, this is around the controversy around the stay put decisions that were made around high-rise buildings and when and how people can be evacuated into a smoke-filled escape route. Essentially, escape routes are provided and should be secure for up to 30 minutes from the effects of smoke and fire should one occur in a flat in a residential building. Unfortunately, if that fire compartmentation is compromised, which is what happened in Grenfell, people will have to evacuate through a smoke-filled staircase. And the provision of smoke hoods would allow us to safely do that where necessary. Hopefully it wouldn't be necessary, but this is about enabling our crews to safely rescue people where they need to.
Fantastic. I got that, but I just wanted to clarify it because it may have been, it could have been misunderstood if you didn't get where you were going. Thank you for that, Pete. George, Councillor Wheeler, Vice Chair, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a couple of points, if I may. Councillor Corvid mentioned the 89 buildings, and Pete also mentioned that the list from DCLG had 89 on, and suggested that there might be a few more, but in paragraph 2.4 of the report, it refers to 172 high-rise buildings in Devon and Somerset, sorry. That's 80 more than the DCLG list. I wondered if there was if we know what the reason for that was, please.
Yeah, so this is the issue between high-rise residential buildings and other high-rise buildings. So the other high-rise buildings will be things like hospitals, schools, hotels. So where they are commercial, have a commercial interest, they won't be included in the list of 89, which is specifically around those which are residential for as people's main dwellings. So that's a direct impact of the Grenfell Tower. It's related to that, Councillor.
That's very clear. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Can I ask another one? Paragraph.
You muted yourself, George. Still muted.
George, you're on mute.
Have I still muted myself? Or
We can hear you now.
Right. Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Pete. That's very clear. Could I also ask about the still on paragraph 2.4?
Yeah, carry on, George.
There's an issue about ACM cladding. Is that the only type of cladding that we're concerned about? I know that's what was on Grenfell, and that's what people have concentrated on. That's what a lot of been the concentration about. But I think there have been other potentially dangerous forms of cladding that have been identified as well. And are those the subject of investigation as well, please?
Yeah, so right, so the aluminium composite material cladding, the ACM cladding, was what was around Grenfell Tower and caused the significant fire spread in short space of time. And as indicated there in paragraph 2.4, the Devonport Towers, the cladding removed and have been deemed low risk now. There are other issues around cladding that are being investigated. We haven't been made aware directly of anything that we need to take into account at this point in time, but there will be tests going on to ensure that other types of cladding that are declared safe are still suitable and correct for that outcome. But as soon as we get any feedback on that, we'll obviously report back.
Thanks for that, Chair.
No, George, thank you for the questions. It's always good to have members come in and ask questions to help us understand everything. So thank you for taking the time. I'm not aware of any other members that would ask any questions. I'll just pause for a second in case anyone wants to shout. Okay, no, so thank you for that, Pete. Thank you very much for that report. I think this, the Grenville related items, the funding is growing as we thought it would, and I'm pleased that we're ahead of the ball in relation to that. I'd welcome a continued update for it. Obviously, we'll speak between meetings to see whether it's relevant to bring to the next one or not. But there are a couple of action points which I know Sam has picked up. But thank you very much for your time. I think unless anyone has anything else, do you have anything else to add, Pete or Gavin, before we look to move on?
Not from me, thanks, Chair.
No, nothing from me either. Thank you.
Super. Sam, I think I've pretty much done everything now. So if you could share those action points with us after the meeting, we can move them forward. Otherwise, members and officers, thank you all very much for your time. And thank you for those that are viewing us on YouTube. Don't forget to come back, because all of our meetings are there. And it's a wonderful and interesting opportunity for you to understand the intricacies of the Fire Authority and your members that represent you on it. That being said, thank you very much for your time, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone. I now declare the meeting closed.
Well done, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.